Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode here of New Album Spotlight, the show where I put the spotlight on a new album in progressive rock or related genres, one that I recommend to you guys if you like similar music as me. I don't consider myself a music critic, so to speak. I consider myself a music fan that likes to recommend great new music to people who love the same style of music that I do, which is progressive rock and related things that are a bit more adventurous, experimental, imaginative. That's the kind of music that really speaks to me, and I have a great one today. This came out this past Friday. It's Einar Solberg's record, Vox Occulta. Einar Solberg is the frontman of Leprous, a very prominent prog metal project that have done a long line of records, ever since the early 2000s up through now. And Einar Solberg has a very unique voice. Like, he has this operatic voice with a huge range. He can sing in these beautiful falsettos with full power, and he's just a really excellent vocalist who can do pretty much anything. And it's really interesting here that he's doing a solo record that's focused on his vocals, but of course there's incredible music all around him. He's a showman. He loves like this more dramatic presentation, this cinematic experience, and that really shows and shines on this record, which is just a fantastic one. His previous solo record that he released was called 16. That was in 2023, and I believe I did a review of that one as well, which was much more introspective and personal. It felt like a bit more reserved, but it covered a lot of musical ground of his own influences. I believe the record was inspired by what happened to him at age 16 and how that changed his life. So very autobiographical, very personal to him, and was a very sprawling record with a lot of different experimental styles that felt a bit separated from Leprous. And this record is a bit more bombastic and a bit more expressive and expansive, and he's delving into some more harder edge styles, some of that metal that he's known for in Leprous, but a lot of just this really dramatic orchestration and these really operatic and expressive vocals that come to the forefront and allow him a different sort of expression than what he has with Leprous. And it seems like this is kind of his plan moving forward, is to do more of the standard progressive metal stuff with Leprous, but doing these more experimental, cinematic, bombastic type of works on his solo records, which I think is a cool delineation. My experience with Leprous is maybe different than a lot of other Leprous fans. I didn't really come into Leprous till much later in their career, and I know for a lot of people they love the early records from Leprous. They're more experimental, more heavy, more, definitely in the more quirky, experimental prog metal vein, with some like growling heavy vocals and things like that. But I really came into the group with Pitfalls from 2019, and then Aphelion in 2021. Those two records really spoke to me. They're much more introspective and not quite as heavy, not quite as hard, and more melodic, and I just really appreciated this kind of epic scope of the music without it hitting over your head with harshness. That's just kind of my preference, and I know I'm a little bit on an island with that take from a lot of other Leprous fans who prefer their older, more heavier material. Melodies of Atonement, which was their last record in 2024, was a little bit of a step down. I thought it felt a little bit bland in places and wasn't really doing much different than what we'd already found on Pitfalls and Aphelion. Felt like they were kind of like settling into a formula that wasn't very exciting. But there was still a lot of great stuff there. It wasn't a total terrible record. I think it was an enjoyable record. I didn't get as excited as I did on the previous records because they didn't quite have as much of that adventurous kind of experimental spirit, and it felt like a little bit like Leprous, modern Leprous by numbers perhaps. But I think for people who are seeking something a bit different and more experimental and more harkening back to the traditional spirit of Leprous on that record, which I think part of the problem was is that it was hyped as like a return to form for Leprous, back to some of their heavier, darker moments when it was really sparse on that record. But I think this record is really what fans have been looking for more so, where it delves back into some of that heaviness. There's some peppered moments of like the heavy, harsh growling vocals and heavier guitar work and more intensity. But it's balanced with these like cinematic soundscapes, these things that feel like they can be plucked straight out of musical theater and are very expressive and expansive. And you get lots of string arrangements and brass arrangements, and the orchestra that's playing on several of these tracks, the Norwegian Radio Orchestra, just does a fantastic job of making this feel like you're listening to a movie soundtrack. And it's really a great work of art, and showcases Einar Solberg in a whole new light, even though he's done so much with his vocals already through Leprous and his previous solo record, but this just brings it to a new level. And I'm excited for the prospect that this is kind of Einar's direction moving forward. On this record, Einar Solberg's doing the vocals, obviously, keys and piano, but we've also got Jed Lingat on bass, Ben Levin on guitar, Pierre Daniel on guitar, John Brown on guitar, Kelly Gudjonsson on drums, and Chris Baum on violin. So he's got some people helping him beef out the music here with some guitars and bass and drum work, leading to some of those heavier moments. And of course, like I mentioned, the Norwegian Radio Orchestra really brings this cinematic flavor. It begins with Stella Mortua, which has that sweeping orchestration before we get those operatic vocals, beautiful strings, a crooning vocal, epic sweeping build to these stabbing strings and backing guitars to give more weight and power to Einar's expressive vocals. And I really like the light and shade of this record, that there's moments of pure beauty, and just those strings just bring this kind of gorgeous, like ethereal quality at moments in the record. But then it'll build up to epic heights, and you get this like symphonic build of just intensity, like you're watching this big high action, like expansive epic movie. And I like the difference between those two modes that keeps being switched and played around with. And then you get a track like Medulla, which comes second, which is much more of a traditional kind of almost leprosy metal track. You know, it has that groovy guitar riff on top of ominous strings, some funky bass grooves. Einar's almost kind of darker talk style vocals before he gets to stretch into those more expressive moments, some dark groovy prog metal with some orchestral breaks and violin work to kind of break up this kind of more standard prog metal track. But it's just really well crafted and just really fun to listen to, and adds another flavor to this record that gives it its variety and different moments. Vox Occulta, the title track, comes next. And this is very much cinematic and operatic and all those things. Very epic, stabbing strings over tribal rhythms, beautiful violins, and added power from the rock instruments. And that's some kind of a tradition in rock music and metal music, is to bring this rock power but have an orchestration behind it, this kind of orchestra with rock band that's happened in many different occasions. I think about Dream Theater and that Score concert where they brought a whole orchestra with them backing them. I think especially with prog music, that orchestra really adds some excellent elements that complement progressive rock expertly well, and bring in this kind of symphonic element that was always baked in even in the early days of Yes, who also had their own concert in more recent times with orchestra in like the early 2000s with the Magnification album. So the orchestra really works seamlessly well with this style of music, especially with Einar's vocal style that's very operatic, very expressive and emotional and dramatic and sweeping. Like that perfectly matches with this orchestra feel. Some of this track almost feels like it could be the soundtrack to like a James Bond movie, with some elegant brass and some really darker, heavier strings. And towards the end, Einar gets a chance to go like full death metal screaming under ominous orchestration. And it's gone on record that I'm not a huge fan of like the death metal growls and stuff. But when it's done in limited doses, I'm okay with it, just to kind of accent the emotions and the storytelling. And I think that's how it's utilized here on this record in various sections. Liberatio comes next, a more furious, darker pace, opens with distorted guitar and swirling strings, and Einar stabbing vocals, leads to a catchy and fun upbeat chorus. So once again, kind of playing with different feels and different moods, even within one piece. I really like Serenitas, which is track 5 here, because it adds a different flavor once again. It's more of a ballad, more of a sweeter, kind of softer piece. After all these big, more epic, like action movie type sequences, it's kind of a nice break. Sweet piano notes ring out, giving this a different feel and feeling a bit more fragile and delicate. Einar's vocals are much more restrained. And I love how Einar's able to adapt to these different styles as well. You know, he's able to like really have the power and intensity when he needs it, but he's also able to rein it back in and just have this fragile, delicate beauty to his voice when the piece really calls for that. Vita Fragilis comes next in the track list. Back to that orchestral sound and building power. Lots of light and shade with some fragile orchestral moments, balanced with some more driving rock-backed intensity. Get those sweeping vocals showcasing Einar's range and versatility. And once again, there's moments of that like death growl feel, showcasing that intensity and darkness of the material. Really a very cool track that I think really personifies the record really well. Then we get into one of the longer tracks here, track number 7, Grex, of just beautiful extended track. It's almost 12 minutes long. Beautiful violin and organ. Open this one with much more slower pace with Einar's vocal theatrics on top. It has a big emotional buildup, great swelling strings and beefy guitar work, leading to a really epic and emotive guitar solo. This is one of the best guitar moments on the record, and we get this pure like symphonic magic where the rock elements kind of fade away and we're left with strings and light vocalizations, leading to the singular organ and light string work and just beautiful, gorgeous cello. So it really emphasizes the orchestra and this beautiful backing sound and symphonic nature before it leads back to that like big rock power and expressive vocals and added growls to bring back that intensity towards the end of the track to put you on this big journey. It's 12 minutes and you feel this whole journey from this lighter, more fragile moment to this darker intensity and traveling into these different worlds. And I think it's fantastically done. And then we get a more softer track to kind of end the record on, Anima Lucis, beautiful orchestral strings, Einar's fragile vocals, very pretty and cinematic, and it builds to a bit of a epic finale at the end of the track, but most of the track is focused on this kind of fragile, quiet down beauty that kind of gives you a little bit of a breather after some intense music that came before it. So a really fascinating album. I love Einar kind of bringing in this cinematic flavor, allowing his expressive, expansive vocals to really shine, backed by this really cool orchestra. And I think for fans of Leprous who have felt like the albums have gotten a little bit samey in the last few records, like they've kind of settled into a style that they're kind of comfortable with, I think people will like the more experimental nature of this record where Einar's just going for broke and just doing these big expressive things with his vocals, just really showcasing the entire field of his range and his versatility, going from these soft, fragile vocals to these really deep, dark growls. Like it really captures everything that his vocals can do, and that's great for a solo record for a vocalist. And I think he's one of the best in the field. You know, he's one of the best vocalists in terms of his ability level and the like different range that he's able to have in his works. So I recommend this one. It's really fascinating. This is coming from a person who's not a huge Leprous fan, especially early Leprous, but I really found a lot to love from this record and find it to be a kind of a refreshing deviation from some of the more standard prog rock that I've been listening to that embraces this kind of, you know, soundtrack feel and feels like you're thrust into this like big epic fantasy movie with action sequences and more beautiful, you know, fantastical moments that draw your imagination and this beautiful voice to kind of direct you through the whole experience. So recommended. Listen to it if that sounds interesting to you. I think it's great music that deserves to be heard, and hopefully you guys will check it out. So thank you guys for joining me. I'll be doing new reviews soon for Advent Horizon and Crownlands, and probably a few other records in between. So hopefully you guys enjoy what's going on with the channel. I'll be doing an April roundup of my favorite releases in April, and this will certainly be on that list of one of my favorite releases from the month. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you in a future episode. Bye everybody, enjoy the music!